Власне, перше слово
So the first word in our panel I would like to give to, with a great pleasure, to Vitalii Nakhmanovych. He's a historian, researcher who is working for many years on research of Babyn Yar, and who was a part of the project of Museum of Babyn Yar. And he is the Chief Research Associate of the Museum of the History of the City of Kyiv. He is the Secretary of Babyn Yar Civic Committee in Kyiv. And Vitalii, the floor is yours. Also, I would like to make some small notes of like a technical note. We have 20 minutes per each speaker. So also to have some time for our participants to discuss your speech. Dear colleague, the first that you should know about the Babyn Yar Museum is that it doesn't exist. I would not, Rosa will not let me lie, because we know that reserve is existing, but museum is not. And this is a big challenge, and the challenge brings us an opportunity. And probably there is a sense, it makes sense that it was not created before the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and we have this opportunity to create it finally after the war is over, considering the changes in our views on the historical memory, and also historical changes that will change during this time. To make it more relevant. And in that sense, it is relevant to look through the history, not of creating of the museum, but because it's not on just the history of the hope, but this is a history of different attempts of how to create the normal museum, and like to hold some exhibitions there and educational projects. And this project is really difficult. It's not described anywhere how steps by steps how to make it. And also I would not go into the details of the history of the creating of this project, but I will tell you some more about some issues.
The problem of Museum of Babyn Yar is a part of general problem of memorialization of Babyn Yar. That's why, besides the problem, so to say, about whom this museum will tell, there is also a problem who will launch this museum, and there are different options. Where this museum will be placed, I mean the territory, and who is the target audience of this museum. We will talk about this later. Firstly, about the potential content of the museum. The first thing that unites all existing projects in the course of 35 years, it was a refusal from a Soviet narrative that the victims were just Soviet citizens without any split into categories. And there is a general approval that the central part in the history and memory about Babyn Yar, it's a Jewish tragedy in the years of the Second World War, Holocaust. This is important because this point is approved by all stakeholders, so to say. But this is, the first point approved by everybody, and the last one approved by everybody. Then the challenges start. How to talk about the role and destiny of Ukrainians in the history of Babyn Yar, how to evaluate the role of Soviet Union when we talk about Babyn Yar, how understand the post-war history of Babyn Yar. The key thing is context. Context of Jewish tragedy are the following. First, Jewish tragedy as Jewish one, ignoring other aspects of the history of Babyn Yar. Then, Babyn Yar story as a component of Holocaust. When we expand this from local point, then it also can be presented as a part of the history of the Jews of Ukraine. To present it as a component of the general story of Babyn Yar, as part of the tragedy of different victims of the Nazis, and not only the Nazis. Here, and the last one, Jewish tragedy in the context of modern war of Russia against Ukraine. Each context also presents a lot of options how to think about other problematic questions. For example, Jewish tragedy of Babyn Yar has two options. One option was presented in public museum or museum exhibition that was presented in two rooms of the premises of Niemanska Street 7. It was a place of Jewish organization headed by Mr. Ilya Levitas, and it was the only exhibition that lasted for a long time, but then Mr. Ilya Levitas passed away, and his heir lost these premises, and now there is no exhibition there. This exhibition told about three categories of people, about Jewish people, victims, the survivors, and Ukrainian writers among the nations. So it was a story of the death and survival of Jewish people. Probably this was the first approach to what Mr. Boris has mentioned. The survivals also were presented there, but it was only about Babyn Yar. Totally opposite approach was proposed last year in the course of exhibition. Memorial Center of Holocaust Babyn Yar launched this in the Museum of the History of Kyiv. It was only about the tragedy of Babyn Yar, and also but Ukrainians were presented there as traitors and collaborators. We see here the same context, but very different accents. This was very sad. Speaking as Babyn Yar as a component of the Holocaust history. One option was presented by Babyn Yar Center, which I had mentioned. Holocaust in ex-Soviet Union. All non-Jewish victims were, so to say, deported from the borders of Babyn Yar. And Ukrainian role was only about participation in Holocaust. Another context was presented, was created under the umbrella of the Institute of History of Ukraine. Babyn Yar was understood as a part of entire history of Holocaust, not only Holocaust in the Soviet Union. Holocaust was a symbol of all genocides in the world, and the role of Ukrainians, and not only Ukrainians, was presented via the role of the writers among the nations, and it was a possible example that we need today in our reality. Speaking of Jewish strategy as a part of the Jewish history of Ukraine, not much development in this project. Theoretically, it was part of Spatshina Center, but thankfully it wasn't built in Babyn Yar. Also, it was a project related to the plans to build something on Jewish cemetery. This was a project of Mr. Rabinovich. It wasn't launched, but an idea like this is somewhere in the air, and we just must consider that it exists as an idea. Another dimension. Tragedy of Jewish people as a component of the general tragedy of Babyn Yar. Here are two options. Option number one, presented on exhibitions in the Museum of the History of Kyiv. In 1991, it was an exhibition sorry, I forgot the title of it. Soviet something.
Радянський громадсько-історико-освітній центр Babyn Yar, очолюваний паном Шлайном.
And it was an organization in 1991, and also in 96 and 2001, new exhibitions appeared in the Museum of the History of Kyiv. It was a modernized Soviet concept of the general history of the Second World War, but with corrupted memory of Jewish understanding of Babyn Yar. Fascist Germany was the enemy, and the Soviets were the liberators of Kyiv. Among victims of Babyn Yar, there were Jewish people, heroes of Soviet underground, Ukrainian nationalists, were presented as collaborators and helpers of the Nazis, and further conclusions were presented. Also, there were some competitions in 1960s, but in 1991 it wasn't mentioned. 1976 we got the monument, and it was done.
Радянський варіант з єврейським присмаком.
It was a Soviet option with Jewish accent. Another option, the concept launched by the Institute of the History of Ukraine. In 2016, there was an exhibition in the Museum of Kyiv, and also there were a few other projects. the history of Babyn Yar, the military history, was read in the context of the history of that territory from the 19th century. It was a part of the history of this space. So the Babyn Yar history was not about Nazis' occupation only or the murders of Jewish people only. No, it was the entire course of history and story with symbolism. All victims of Babyn Yar were mentioned. Jewish people and Ukrainian people were mentioned also as victims. The role with Ukrainian National Police was mentioned, but with the understanding that it was Nazis' initiative. And we are trying to reject Soviet narrative and to establish new vision of the history of Babyn Yar. But post-war history is a fight of different narratives.
Частину історії, як історії просто визволення, і дякую. І нарешті цей порівняльний погляд,
this, so to say, comparative approach, Bakhmut, the face of genocide. This is how the exhibition was called. Babyn Yar Reserve presented this, and the next step was in the same reserve, Babyn Yar, the Mirrors of Death exhibition, where Soviet crimes, Nazi crimes, and modern Russian crimes. It is very important to underline. But because previously Soviet crimes were ignored, and this new approach in the context of Russian war against Ukraine, you see, this is a new approach.
And this regime is like sort of following previous crime regimes. What about the rest? Why can't we come to the common decision on creating of Babyn Yar Museum? Because we have some issue that I've started to mention. Who creates museum? Because the priority belongs to Jewish community in creating this museum. This is the situation that we have. We can be pro this situation or against it, but we have it. So this is a priority of Jewish community, and it could be implemented in different ways. But almost any project of establishing this museum should be sanctioned by Jewish community. It could be leaders of Jewish organization, it could be Jewish businessmen, it could be international Jewish organization, or some ethnic Jews that are part of some project, and they should acknowledge that those project of the museum is legitimate in their eyes. So museum can be as a state institution with Jewish influence, or it could be established by Jewish community. And the content of the museum will be established by our scientific community, but it should be also approved by Jewish community, of course. But to understand that we don't have a choice between Ukrainian and Jewish positions, it's like we are talking about the different Jewish positions. We can talk about the decision between Soviet, post-Soviet, and Ukrainian national positions. But obviously, there is no Ukrainian-Jewish conflict in this narrative, and we have to reflect that, of course. because oftentimes in public discussions we can hear this like when we start to talk about the different positions and that contradict each other, and they can sort of bring some issues. What about the place, the location of this museum? Unfortunately, main projects for creating of the museum of Babyn Yar is basically in the Babyn Yar itself or in the cemetery next to Babyn Yar. But this is a positive moment because modern attempts to intrude in the burial places helps to reduce strange propositions in decision making of this problem. Because we had some cases that some anti-Ukrainians or like old Levit concepts were not implemented because they were established in the different place. Of course, if they had proper location, the attitude would be completely different. We have three options for whom this museum is created. This one point is that like museum is created for our that is museum is created by Jews for Jews. The second is like museum is created for the foreign visitors who would just like visit from the West countries, and they will see that we have a great culture here and we have a great museum. We can create a museum that is oriented on Ukrainian visitors, and among those, if we decide which of these three points to choose, the content of this museum would be different. How to solve this problem? If we are talking about the National Ukrainian Museum Babyn Yar, for that Ukrainians, like Ukrainian citizens, have to overcome like the old disease of like low self-esteem. That we should understand that we are creating this space not for foreigners but for ourselves. But for that we need like a good political community, national community, and then only we can create like our common national memory that would not have any conflicts inside, but it would be very helpful in creating like the memorial project. If we are talking about the option about the Jewish Museum for Jews, it's okay too for the Jewish community to create the museum for themselves, but it should be located not on the territory of Babyn Yar, but somewhere in the city. And moreover, the paradigm of self-consciousness of Jews in Ukraine should be changed from Soviet or post-Soviet Jews to Ukrainian Jews. And obviously, it should become more tolerant and include understanding and compassion to the history of Ukrainians and other national communities. We see such an examples implemented already, and this small museum that was on Nimitska Street, and in Dnipro, in the Jewish Community Center, there is a museum of Holocaust in Ukraine, which is very modern and which looks through all those questions in a modern way, and we don't have any questions to them. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vitalii. Thank you that you were that you are such in time. You made your speech in 20 minutes. Thank you for that. And I would also like to... I'm expecting some questions from our guests, and I would like to start. My question is that if we can perceive this pose that we have today is connected to the Ukrainian-Russian war and the search of the inner dialogue and establishing of the attitude to Babyn Yar? Is it like a carte blanche of understanding or like a form of communication and to showing of this museum in the public space? All of the projects that you have mentioned was looked through from different points of view, and there were different ways of presenting the information and different ways of communication of this museum. My question is, is it like a prolongation of establishing of the museum, or is it just like a space of the birth of the project of Museum of Babyn Yar? Of course, it's what I said, that the fact that this museum is not created yet is firstly because of our reality, because in our community, in our society, we don't have an agreement on how it should look and what content it should have. Secondly, it shows that society is not ready to compromise, to consolidate in memory, and it's not only in regards of the memory of Holocaust or Babyn Yar, but we have problems with historical memory on different issues. We know this, and we can see it in different dimensions. And not to go too far, I would like to mention second Polish Ukrainian communique that has shown us the lack in Ukraine of its own position on this issue. And of course, that we don't have like unique position and united position on this issue. So modern war just gives us the opportunity to understand more the events of the Second World War, and also the times of the Soviet era before and after the war, and to create a new historical memory paradigm that would show the particularities of Ukrainian history of the end of 20th, 21st centuries, not Soviet or Western or Jewish, but just Ukrainian, because Ukrainian history has its own problems and issues, and we can understand that it's not similar to other countries in the region. And we have to look at it not as a carte blanche, but as opportunity to move towards the understanding of this difficult question.
Да, прошу піднімати руку.
Mic is working now. Okay. Igor Lisovsky is State Service from Ethnopolicy. I'm very thankful for your speech. It was very informative. I have a question. In the context of the building of the museum in Babyn Yar, what should we do with the Roma genocide in Babyn Yar? Is there a place there for them? If there's going to be established a big museum, would it be limited just by the topic of the Jewish genocide, or will be other minorities included? And how much this question is explored? We know that there is a monument of Roma Kibitka there, but I would like to hear your opinion. The story of this Kibitka monument and what was before it is not just the story of the genocide of Roma, but it's just like a history of genocide, of memory of that genocide. It's what was happening during those events was including our state government and lots of other participants. My personal view on this topic is in the concept of creating a work group, and I'm part of this work group. And it includes, of course, the memory of Roma genocide, and it goes without any questions. But what decision would be made when the museum will be established? I hope that the museum will be tolerant and inclusive, but there are a lot of actors who have different views on this subject.
Так, колеги, я прошу піднімати руку.
My dear colleagues, I would like you to raise your hands so we can pass the mic, so we will not lose any valuable opinions for the record. I think there is not very well understood that the central is the tragedy that what has happened in September 29th, 30, but it doesn't say that we will not talk about other events that were happening in Babyn Yar. And of course, I can give you 100% that our position, and we were talking about it openly, that Roma genocide and how it is not very well known for lots of people, or not very well noticed for many people. We should be the project who is talking about it, and I can give you 100% that we will have the expositions in regards of this topic, and we're gonna have a special place devoted to it.
Прошу ще одне питання.
Please, one more question.
Анатолій Курносов, я займаюся.
Anatoly Kurnosov, I'm working on Polish-Ukrainian relationships, and I'm writing articles about this. Vitaly already mentioned so-called Ukrainian police. Also, it was established by Germans, and then Anatoly was mentioning this situation when Polish historians were using these German death camps, and I remember this example was very widespread meme about where you can see two foreign visitors next to Auschwitz, and one asks what is written there, and another said I don't know, I cannot read Polish. Maybe I have this as a question or as a reflection, because I see a lot of information in Polish media about the Russian propaganda before the day of liberation of Auschwitz, and one of the narrative is that Ukrainian neo-Nazi are supported in Kyiv, or that on the day of liberation of Auschwitz were not invited the victims, but were invited the persecutors. But we know that this is some propaganda from Russia to that wants to harm Ukraine, Germany, and Poland all together.
I suppose we are in need of a common position of experts and professionals in history of these countries. Probably there are some problems. I would like to point out that, in fact, one of the key issues of the concept of this memorial center of Holocaust, Babyn Yar, it was not about the participation of Ukraine, Baltic countries, and Poland in the chapter about Holocaust on the territory of Russia. There were no collaborators. Imagine, the collaborators were everywhere, but not only in Russia. Oh, lucky Russia. This obviously shows that it's not about the condemnation of collaboration in general. It's about whitewashing category. Via Jewish history, they had an aim to make nations guilty, those nations that are enemies of Russia, and this concept on the formal level still exists in Ukraine, because this center still exists in Ukraine, and their position is presented on their website. And after 2019, all these initiatives were supported. But I think that we should not go into reactive policy. We shouldn't react what is said in Moscow or somewhere else. We must develop our own position, and on the basis of our position, we should look for understanding with other countries and nations. But it shouldn't look like this. They said something and we react. This position is passive and we will fail with it. And I also would like to react. The first thesis, we worked together with Mr. Vitalii for many years. I would like to bring one remark. It's not to you personally, but it's I'm talking about this everywhere. Devil is kept in details. And Russian-Ukrainian war, I hate this term, because this is a war of Russia against Ukraine, because Russia attacked Ukraine. When we have this thing, Russian-Ukrainian war, it looks like that two countries are on the same level, and this is lies, because Russia is a nuclear superpower with huge territory. And what Mr. Vitalii said, I dream and I do believe that this center, this is the enemy, the same as Moscow Patriarchy. Current president, I don't know why he doesn't do anything. This is the center. This center actually want us to be inside Russian concentration camp, and I do believe that one day this center will disappear.